There comes a moment, fragile, elusive, almost too subtle to grasp, when a woman begins to sense a shift in the man she loves, a tremor that shakes the emotional ground between them, so faint at first that it would be easy to dismiss it as imagination, yet so persistent that it nestles quietly in her awareness, whispering that something fundamental is changing. At the beginning, the signs are mere hints, a pause that lingers slightly longer before he responds to her words, a touch of distraction in his gaze, a conversation that once flowed like a river now stumbling over dry stones. The energy between them, once effortless and spontaneous, begins to falter, to lose its natural current, and although no harsh words are spoken and no dramatic gestures made, a silent vacuum starts to grow between what once felt vibrantly alive. She notices it not through grand gestures, but in the nuances, the way his messages, once swift and playful, now arrive delayed and measured, the way his attention, once fierce and unbidden, now feels fractured, as if part of him were already somewhere else. And although her mind rushes to shield her heart, offering rationalizations like, "He's stressed, he's busy, it's just a phase," beneath those soothing lies, a slow, creeping dread takes root, expanding through her body with the insidious certainty of smoke filling a sealed room. And from that dread blooms a single devastating question, one that will not let her rest. What have I done wrong? Suddenly, the ordinary details of their daily exchanges transform into enigmatic signs to be obsessively decoded. Each missed call, each shorter reply, each inattentive glance serving as potential evidence in the silent, merciless trial she conducts within herself. And the memories she once cherished, laughter, intimacy, the simple joy of being together, are now revisited with surgical precision, not for comfort, but to locate the precise moment when, perhaps without realizing, she began to lose him. The world she had trusted, the emotional foundation she had built with love and care, begins to feel alarmingly fragile, as if it were nothing but a delicate construction of hopes balanced precariously on invisible strings. And now those strings, one by one, are starting to fray. Yet the most unbearable pain is not his behavior itself, but the collapse of her own certainty, the disintegration of the emotional shelter she thought indestructible, leading her to a state where fear takes the wheel and drives her toward the very actions that, ironically, will hasten what she fears. Most because emotional anxiety, in its most cruel form, does not announce itself with screams, but seeps quietly into the soul, transforming small manageable doubts into full-blown catastrophes. And while the wiser course would be to sit with that discomfort, to observe it without acting, the human instinct screams for movement, for resolution, for action, to reach out, to hold tighter, to repair what seems to be slipping away. In her frantic attempts to bridge the widening gap, she begins to act not from love, but from fear, shifting the energy between them from one of invitation to one of pressure. And while she believes she is fighting for the relationship, what she is really doing, without even realizing it, is tightening a knot around a spirit that longs for space. For love, as painful as it is to admit, cannot be sustained through force or desperation. The more we clutch at it, the faster it flees from our grasp, like sand slipping through desperate fingers. As Carl Jung reminds us in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, what you resist persists. And so, resisting loss with panic and clinging only brings about the very separation she wishes to avoid, turning a living bond into a dying burden. At this stage, without words, without confrontation, an invisible wall begins to rise between them. She reaches out more. He withdraws further, not necessarily because his feelings have died, but because the space that once allowed desire to breathe has been suffocated by invisible threads of expectation and fear. He may not be able to articulate it, but he feels it. The energy has shifted, the ease has evaporated, and in place of the woman who once radiated her own light, he now senses a woman chasing his approval, a subtle yet fatal transformation that erodes the very foundation of attraction. And thus the tragedy unfolds not in dramatic betrayals or explosive endings, but in the silent erosion of connection. The slow death of intimacy under the weight of unspoken fears. She feels it first in her bones, in her heartbeat, in the quiet spaces between their words, and though she may fight it, deny it, or drown it in desperate attempts to reconnect, deep down she knows something precious has already begun to slip away. Once the shadow of fear settles into her heart, almost inevitably, she is propelled into action, not because the situation demands it, but because her mind, desperate for relief from uncertainty, demands movement, demands an attempt to repair what feels like a sudden and inexplicable fracture. Driven by the terror of losing the emotional bond she cherishes, the woman instinctively falls into a classic but fatal trap. She tries harder. She sends more messages, each carefully crafted, to reignite the lost warmth. She proposes more meetings, more conversations, more proofs of love, believing, hoping that if she just shows him how much she cares, if she just holds on tighter, he will feel the same security she is so desperately trying to reclaim. But what she does not yet realize is that this very effort, born from love but tainted by fear, does not heal the rift. It deepens it. The man, who once was drawn to her radiance, her self-possession, her natural flow, now senses a shift he cannot fully explain. He feels an invisible pressure, a silent insistence woven into her words, her touch, her presence. What was once easy now feels loaded. What was once mutual now feels like expectation. And because masculine energy, at its core, thrives on freedom, on challenge, on the magnetic pull of a woman who belongs first and foremost to herself, he instinctively recoils from the weight of emotional dependency that he now senses, subtle but undeniable. It is a cruel paradox. The more she offers herself, the less valuable she appears in his eyes. Not because she lacks worth, but because her energy now projects a silent scream. I need you to complete me. And need, unlike love, suffocates, as Carl Jung eloquently expressed in The Undiscovered Self. Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking. When fear dominates the emotional landscape, the will to control, however soft, however disguised as affection, replaces true love, and the natural flow between two souls collapses under the burden of invisible demands. In her attempt to save the relationship, the woman unintentionally shifts her energy from attraction to obligation. She sends longer texts that go unanswered. She initiates deep conversations that feel forced. She plans encounters to fix things, but notices with growing despair that each meeting feels emptier than the last. Instead of igniting desire, her efforts build an invisible wall, because what truly nourishes attraction is not availability or effort, but mystery, freedom, and the vibrant energy of self-respect. The more she leans in, the more he leans away, not out of malice, not even out of conscious decision, but because the emotional ecosystem between them has changed. What once was a dance now feels like a chase, and no one wants to be chased when what they crave is to be inspired. Thus begins the slow erosion of connection, accelerated not by a lack of love, but by a desperate attempt to control it. Every action taken from fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, each step forward pushing him further into retreat. And she, sensing the distance growing despite her efforts, often doubles down, believing that if she just tries harder, loves louder, gives more of herself, she can reclaim what is slipping through her fingers. But in truth, she is only tightening the noose around a bond that requires oxygen, space and autonomy to breathe. The path she is walking, though paved with good intentions, leads not to reconnection, but to exhaustion for both of them. The more she seeks affirmation externally, the further she moves from her own center, from the inner radiance that once made her magnetic. She is no longer meeting him from a place of fullness, but from a place of craving. And this craving, though understandable, is precisely what dulls the spark that once lit the path between their souls. Only when she stops, when she ceases the endless doing, the frantic giving, the desperate reaching, can she begin to understand that love cannot be earned through effort, nor maintained through sacrifice. It must be received freely, or it is not love at all. And sometimes, the bravest thing she can do is to be still, to resist the overwhelming impulse to act, and to allow the storm of fear to pass without trying to control its winds, because true connection is never built on anxiety. It is born in the quiet space, where two whole beings meet without the need to complete each other. If there is one profound and universal law that governs the invisible dynamics of human relationships, it is this: the more compulsively we cling to something, the more inevitably we push it away. This is not merely a poetic observation, it is a deep psychological truth, one that Carl Gustav Jung explored relentlessly in his works, reminding us that the roots of suffering lie not outside of us but in the desperate attachments we form within. As Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the more compulsively we pursue the object of our desire, the more it slips through our fingers, because our unconscious fear of losing it shapes the very reality we dread. When a woman, fearing the loss of love, begins to grasp for it, to demand it, to chase it, to insist on its continued presence, what she is truly doing, without being conscious of it, is broadcasting her own insecurity, her own inner emptiness, and creating a repelling force that transforms natural affection into suffocating obligation. Desire, in its most vibrant and enduring form, is born from freedom and mystery, from the sacred dance between closeness and space, between presence and absence. It thrives where there is autonomy, where each person remains a sovereign being, choosing to return to the other not out of necessity, but out of authentic will. But fear, when allowed to dominate the psyche, destroys this delicate balance. Fear does not ask, it demands. Fear does not invite, it clings. Fear does not trust, it controls. And so the woman who once captivated through her light now finds herself eclipsing her own radiance by projecting a silent but unmistakable message. I am not enough without you. This transformation is not lost on the man, though he may not articulate it in words. He feels it in the very atmosphere between them, the tension, the silent expectation, the invisible leash that pulls at his freedom. The very thing that once drew him to her, her self-possession, her vibrant individuality, is now fading under the weight of emotional dependency. In The Psychology of the Transference, Jung warns, when projections fall away, what is left often is not love, but fear of loneliness. And this is precisely what begins to surface. Not pure love, but a frantic struggle against imagined abandonment, an unconscious demand for another to fill the void that has opened within. The man, sensing that he is no longer desired for who he is but needed as a shield against her own fear, begins to withdraw, not out of cruelty but out of an instinct for survival. For masculine energy, while capable of profound love, withers under the weight of suffocating dependency. It needs space to breathe, to choose, to move toward the beloved freely and without coercion. The more he senses her fear, the more he instinctively seeks distance, not because he has stopped loving, but because the emotional landscape has shifted from one of joyful connection to one of anxious grasping. Herein lies the brutal irony. The more she tries to hold on, the faster he slips away, not because she is unworthy, but because she has abandoned the very posture that first attracted him, the posture of inner fullness, of radiant selfhood, of love offered without expectation. As Jung wisely notes in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. In this case, what she meets through the withdrawal of the man she loves is not merely external rejection, but a mirror reflecting her own inner fracture, the part of herself that has not yet learned to stand alone, that still seeks completion through another. Understanding this law is painful, but it is also liberating, for once she sees that the true source of her suffering is not the man's changing behavior, but her own desperate attachment to the illusion of permanence, she can begin the slow, courageous work of returning to herself. True love can only thrive when both partners remain whole within themselves. True desire can only blossom in the fertile soil of mutual freedom, and true connection can only endure when it is not suffocated by the clutches of unconscious fear. Thus, paradoxically, the path back to intimacy, to desire, to love, is not one of pursuit but of release, not tightening the grip but opening the hand, not demanding love but embodying it, not chasing him but choosing herself. Only then, from the deep well of her own reclaimed wholeness, can she become again what she once was naturally, the rare jewel that does not plead for attention, but shines quietly, unmistakably, drawing forth love not by asking for it, but by being it. There comes a point, a sacred, painful, necessary point, when a woman, recognizing the futility of her frantic efforts, faces a choice that feels almost unbearable to stop, to resist the urge to act, to reach out, to mend, to fix, and instead turn her energy inward, not as a tactic of manipulation, but as an act of profound self-respect and preservation. This is the beginning of strategic silence, not the cold silence of punishment or withdrawal meant to induce guilt, but the warm, sacred silence that says, "I choose myself first." It is not a game to incite longing. It is a courageous return to one's own center, an acknowledgement that no love worth having can be sustained by begging or desperation. At first, this silence feels like death. It feels like stepping off a cliff into an endless void. The mind, addicted to movement, to validation, to the illusion of control, screams for action. It replays conversations, imagines messages never sent, rehearses dialogues in which she could make him understand, make him see, make him feel what she feels. But if she can resist, if she can sit through the unbearable discomfort without acting, she begins to tap into a power far greater than any she has ever known, the power of her own presence. Independent, radiant, whole. As Jung wrote in the Red Book, solitude is the path on which destiny calls you to yourself. When she chooses silence, she is not abandoning him. She is answering the call of her own soul. She is stepping away not because she does not care, but because she cares enough about herself to refuse to diminish her light in the hope of being seen. This silence is not passive. It is an active, powerful reclamation of energy. Every ounce of attention she once poured into salvaging a bond now flows into her own healing, her own becoming. She stops waiting by the phone. She stops analyzing every word. She stops bleeding energy into someone who may not even be capable of receiving it anymore. Instead, she turns to the practices that nourish her: movement, creation, connection to the earth, conversations with those who see her not as a reflection of their needs, but as a soul in her own right. She rebuilds the temple of her life from within, stone by stone, breath by breath, pain by pain. And in doing so, something miraculous happens. The desperate energy that once repelled begins to transmute into magnetism. The light she once directed outward now illuminates her from within. The man, if he is truly aligned with her soul, will feel this shift, not because she reached for him, but because she became unreachable in the best possible way. She becomes again what Jung described in Psychological Types: the treasure hard to attain, the precious stone hidden deep within the mountain, the rare flower blooming only in secret places. Desire, real and enduring desire, is reborn, not in the chasing but in the space between. It grows in the mystery, in the absence, in the silent question that stirs the soul. Where has she gone? Who is she becoming? Strategic silence is not about absence for the sake of provocation. It is about presence for the sake of truth. It allows the man, if he is capable, to feel the natural consequences of his distance, not as punishment, but as reality. It gives him the space to miss her genuinely, to recognize, perhaps for the first time, the gravity of what he risks losing. But more importantly, it gives her something infinitely more valuable than any relationship. It gives her herself. In the fertile soil of solitude, she blossoms not into the version of herself that pleases others, but into the fullest, most radiant expression of her own soul. She no longer clings to love. She becomes love. She no longer begs to be chosen. She chooses herself. And from that place, untouchable, undeniable, she will attract not through need, but through natural gravitational force. Some will approach, drawn by the radiance they cannot name. Others will fall away, unable to meet her. At this new altitude, and this too is grace, because the silence taught her the most sacred lesson of all, that she is enough and always was, and no love worth having can ever be built on the ruins of self-abandonment. The pain that consumes her in the silent spaces is visceral, sharp, and haunting, but it is not merely the loss of a man that she is mourning. It is something far deeper, far more devastating. The crumbling of an internal promise, the disintegration of a dream once carefully built within her soul. What breaks her heart is not just the absence of his presence, but the death of a future she had already begun to live in her mind. Shared moments, whispered plans, silent assurances that she would be cherished, chosen, safe. And now, as that imagined future collapses, the ground beneath her trembles with a fear far older than this particular love. It is the primal terror of being alone, of being unseen, of being unworthy. This is the great illusion of loss. The man may be leaving, or he may simply be drifting, but the devastation she feels stems not from his actions alone, but from the shattering of the emotional security she thought she had secured. As Jung writes in The Archetypes and the Collective, unconscious, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. And so her unconscious expectations, her need for certainty, her hunger for eternal connection, have surfaced now in the agony of apparent loss, not because she was wrong to hope, but because she had unknowingly anchored her peace to an external form, a form that was never guaranteed to last. In the aftermath, the mind becomes a merciless prison. It replays every moment, the last message left unanswered, the sudden cooling of his touch, the subtle shift in his eyes. It dissects every conversation, searching obsessively for clues, for mistakes, for missed warnings that, if caught in time, might have altered the course of fate. It is a vicious cycle. The more she analyzes, the more elusive the answers become. The more she searches for why, the deeper she sinks into self-recrimination. What began as love turns inward as blame, as shame, as a desperate attempt to rewrite the past so that the present pain might somehow be undone. But this endless self-examination is a trap, one that Jung so vividly describes in Psychological Types. The I. More compulsively we pursue understanding, the less we find it, because the mind cannot solve what the soul must feel. The truth is brutal but liberating. There may be no singular reason, no fatal flaw, no catastrophic error. There may only be the simple, devastating reality that energy shifts, that people evolve, that connections fade when they are no longer nourished from a place of true inner fullness. The real source of her suffering is not external, but internal. It is not the man who wounded her. It is her own abandonment of herself, the placing of her worth into another's hands, the staking of her future on the unpredictable tides of someone else's heart. This is the hidden danger of projection, as Jung repeatedly warned, we do not love others as they are, we love them as we imagine them to be. And when reality shatters that image, the pain feels catastrophic, not because of who the other truly was, but because of what they represented. Hope, validation, salvation. In this realization lies the seed of her liberation. If the source of her suffering was never truly outside her, then neither is the path to her healing. By turning inward, by facing the unbearable loneliness, the hollow ache of unmet expectations, the sharp grief of dreams undone, she can begin to reclaim her soul from the illusions that once enslaved it. This path is not easy. It demands she sit with pain without numbing it. It demands she resist the urge to reach outward for rescue. It demands she feel fully the depth of her own longing and recognize it not as a flaw, but as a sacred call to return to herself. As she does, she begins to see the truth that Jung articulated so powerfully in the Red Book. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. In the silence after the collapse, in the stillness beyond the mind's frantic search for answers, she can awaken. Awaken not to the return of the man, not to the restoration of the fantasy, but to the reality that she was always whole, that her value was never dependent on another's love, and that the love she sought must first be found within. Only then can she step beyond the mind's trap, beyond the endless loops of regret and analysis, and enter a new state of being, one rooted not in fear of loss, but in the unshakable truth of her own worth. Among the many invisible dynamics that slowly erode desire, perhaps none is as quietly devastating as the creeping pattern of over-availability, the slow surrender of boundaries, the gradual dissolving of individuality, the silent offering of one's entire being in a desperate attempt to be chosen, seen, loved. At first it feels noble, even romantic, to be always present, always ready, always offering one's attention and energy without limit or hesitation. It is taught by countless stories that love is about endless giving, endless patience, endless sacrifice. But the soul, far wiser than the stories told to it, knows another truth. Love rooted in over-availability does not ignite passion, it suffocates. And when a woman makes herself perpetually available, physically, emotionally, energetically, she unknowingly erases the very mystery that once made her magnetic. She becomes not the rare jewel hidden behind a curtain of light, but the object displayed in every market stall, familiar and unguarded, stripped of the aura that once made her precious beyond measure. As Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, where there is no tension, no polarity, life becomes stagnant, and where life stagnates, spirit withers. The tension between closeness and space, between yearning and fulfillment, between the seen and the unseen, is essential for the vitality of desire. Without it, there is no movement of soul toward soul, no gravitational pull. Availability without scarcity breeds emotional invisibility. And invisibility, more than rejection, is the true death of romantic connection. The man, sensing that her energy is now offered without discretion, without boundaries, begins to lose the deep, instinctive admiration that comes from pursuing something valuable. Not because he is cruel or shallow, but because human nature craves what challenges us, what invites us, what we must grow to deserve. In offering herself without pause, without self-reserve, the woman unknowingly projects not abundance, but lack, not strength, but need, not radiance, but a desperate hunger that, far from inspiring devotion, triggers retreat. This is a devastating realization because it shatters the fantasy that more giving always results in more love. It confronts the deep, ancestral fear that if she does not constantly remind him of her presence, she will be forgotten, abandoned, replaced. But the paradox is unavoidable. True love does not grow from constant presence. It blooms in the sacred spaces where two sovereign souls dance toward each other freely. True desire is not sustained by endless proximity. It is kept alive by the oxygen of individuality, the space where curiosity, admiration, and longing can breathe. By making herself endlessly available, she cuts off the very mystery that once enchanted him. She becomes predictable, accessible, and eventually emotionally invisible. As Jung noted in Psychological Types, the soul craves experience, craves the unknown, craves to be moved beyond the familiar. Without this hunger, we fall into apathy. When there is no mystery left, no private world still veiled, no inner fire that burns unseen, the soul loses its longing. And without longing, love dries up at its roots. The tragedy is that she gave more, not to manipulate, but out of genuine devotion. She answered every call, accepted every cancellation, initiated every conversation, forgave every slight, offered herself in all her beauty and tenderness. And yet, rather than being rewarded with greater intimacy, she finds herself met with growing distance, disinterest, and finally absence. Not because she was not enough, but because she gave so much that he forgot the value of what he was receiving. True value, true desire, true love cannot be maintained without mystery, without self-possession, without the sacred act of holding a part of oneself in reserve, not as a punishment, but as a testament to the truth that she, in her fullness, is not available to those who do not see, cherish, and rise to meet her. Thus, the first act of reclaiming herself is not to give more, but to give less, to pull back, to guard her inner flame, to become again a woman whose soul is not easily touched, not easily accessed, not easily consumed, not out of pride, but out of deep reverence for the sacredness of her own being, because a love worth keeping is one that recognizes, honors, and moves toward the mystery, not one that grows bored, when the mystery is laid bare too soon. At the end of her long, painful and yet ultimately sacred journey, she comes to understand a truth so simple and so profound that it reorders everything she once believed. The path to true magnetism, the path to authentic, lasting love, does not unfold through desperate attempts to grasp, to convince, or to surrender her soul in exchange for fleeting validation. Rather, it emerges quietly, almost imperceptibly, from the deep, silent work of returning to herself, from the fierce and tender act of reclaiming every fragment of her own being that she once scattered in the hopes of being chosen. She sees now, with clarity, not the clarity of logic but of the soul, that love cannot be secured through persuasion, cannot be demanded through sacrifice, cannot be stabilized by endless availability or by the constant offering of herself on the altar of another's whims. Love, real love, rises naturally where freedom reigns, where two complete beings meet in mutual recognition, and where each remains rooted in their own wholeness, even as they reach toward one another. The anguish she endured, the unanswered messages, the slow cooling of his gaze, the agonizing silence, was not, as she once feared, a punishment or a reflection of her unworthiness. It was, in truth, the necessary fire through which the illusions had to burn away, the sacred disillusionment that forced her to turn inward and confront the vast, aching emptiness she had hoped someone else would fill. As Carl Jung so wisely wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and it is precisely this terrifying acceptance that she must now embrace, to see herself not as broken, because love slipped through her fingers, but as whole because, even in the depths of abandonment, the essence of who she is remained untouched, waiting patiently for her to remember. Standing now at the edge of all she thought she needed, she understands that the real prize was never the love of another, but the reclamation of her own soul. And from this realization grows a power that no heartbreak, no betrayal, no absence can ever diminish. A power rooted not in the fickle admiration of others, but in the eternal truth of her own existence. She no longer needs to chase. She no longer pleads or performs or contorts herself into a version more palatable to someone else's fears or limitations. She rests deeply within her being, radiant in her fullness, knowing that the only love worth having will be the love that recognizes, respects, and reveres the depth of who she truly is. The man who is destined to walk beside her, not to complete her but to accompany her, will feel, on a level beyond words, that he stands before a woman who does not need him to survive, but who chooses to welcome him into a life already rich, already luminous, already whole. And in this choosing, free of fear, free of need, free of desperate attachment, love finds its purest and most potent form. As Jung reminds us in the Red Book, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In becoming who she truly is, no longer hiding her light, no longer bargaining for affection, no longer shrinking in the hope of being loved, she unlocks the highest form of magnetism, a gravitational force that requires no strategy, no games, no suffering, because it emanates naturally from the core of her being. If he returns, it will be because he is drawn not to a void he must fill, but to a flame he yearns to stand beside. And if he does not, she will not crumble, for she will have already found the only relationship that truly matters, the sacred, unbreakable union with herself. Thus, the true path to magnetism is not paved with striving or pleasing or performing. It is the inward journey of healing the ancient wounds, of integrating the disowned parts, of standing in the raw, unvarnished truth of one's own worth, until the world outside becomes simply a mirror reflecting the love that has already been found within. In this place, she no longer begs for love, she inspires it. She no longer fears loss, she welcomes authenticity. She no longer surrenders her soul for connection, she holds her soul as sacred, knowing that what is truly hers can never be lost, and what is not was never meant to remain. And so, by doing the unthinkable, by stopping the chase, by surrendering the need, by standing fully, gloriously, irrevocably in herself, she becomes not a seeker of love, but its source, radiating a magnetism that no man, no destiny, no circumstance can ever extinguish.